All right, so welcome to the first official episode, or the pilot episode for BARF's CRC Podcast. BARF, of course, being Bay Area Riders Forum, and CRC is its Couch Racers Corner Forum, where all things racing discussions happen. First of all, before we get started, my name is Dennis. I am Spec-ECU on BARF, and I want to start off by saying a big thank you to Budman, the head honcho of BARF, for letting us give podcasting a shot for BARF. I'm not able to come up with a crazy idea that he'll turn down, and this being one of them. So hopefully it turns out, and we can keep doing this for quite a bit. I was going to give a brief history of how this whole idea came about, but then I remember that there's a thread that I started in BARF, so I'm not even going to regurgitate what's already been written there. I'm just going to bump that thread up after this episode's recorded, and, if somebody really wants to read about the little history of how this idea came about, it's all there, so we're not going to waste much time on that. But there are some things I want to kind of go over that's not covered in that podcast thread, that being the CRC podcast right now will be mostly MotoGP centric, because just like the race discussions in CRC are predominantly MotoGP, this is kind of follow into the coattails of that. But we are going to be glossing over anything newsworthy in other international and national racing series, road racing or otherwise. I know there are a couple of, or at least a handful of CRC regulars who follow other racing disciplines pretty diligently. Guys like Kurt, you know him as First Buell. There's Steve, his screen name is Dogboy. Those guys, I know they follow other racing series, and they also update CRC for the rest of the members to read. So ideally, we want to be able to invite those guys to join us for an episode to provide the news and updates for those respective series. And ultimately, we want to invite other CRC regulars to join us on podcast episodes, in future podcast episodes. We don't always get to put a face to members we regularly talk to on BARF, so being able to put at least a voice to a name and just adds that kind of extra dimension to the regular encounters around CRC. So we'll see how this all pans out, but yeah, right now with me hosting, I do have two other regular hosts. One of them is Kevin. He is known as Kevin714 on BARF, and he's the one that is self-proclaimed MotoGP madman, but in my opinion, he's actually well-deserving of that title. I mean, he's one of a few guys that I'm aware of around BARF who really has a very good pulse around what's going on as far as MotoGP is concerned. So with that said, I want to introduce Kevin and let him have a little bit of a mic time at this point.
What's going on, guys? First thing to say is that's not self-proclaimed. That popped up on my picture there without my consent or knowledge. One day I was considered a MotoGP madman, but I chose not to change it.
I'm sorry about that. I had a little kind of a cat hair in my throat. Go on.
Don't get me wrong. I'm self-proclaimed a lot of things, like best typer in the world. And those of you who follow.
Okay. That is perfect, because you know what? That is the other reason why I decided to have you co-host this, because you are such an amazing typer that us mere mortals just can't even comprehend what the hell you're typing. So I figured giving you a chance to speak allows us regular members to actually understand what you're saying.
Oh, I mean, just because you can't understand my lyrical wordsmithing, now I'm here in living color for you guys to hear live.
Exactly, but unfortunately, I will admit that after I finally heard your voice, I'm starting to think that maybe it's better to just suffer your typing after all. But that's
great. Man, don't make me get loud.
Well, that was Kevin. So
that's
the
me.
other co-host that we've got lined up here is Rob. You guys know him as, well, you might know him as Stan GMX13, but actually I think it's Stang MX13, right, Rob?
Yeah, so I'm Robert. If you didn't notice, I added not Stan below my name on BARF a while ago, just for all the confusion. I own a Mustang, which is where that came from, but that screen name is old.
didn't know that. I figured the MX was motocross, but I was like, what the heck, the Stang? I mean, I didn't know, but now that makes perfect sense, actually.
Yeah, it's a 66. I've had it for a while, but not that I'm that old. Never mind. Yeah, I'm going to be doing the tech stuff mostly, and I'm the guy that reads all the rule books, so that's pretty much why I'm here. And I got to keep Kevin
Yeah,
in check
actually,
just a little bit.
I pegged Rob to basically be the Neil Spalding of this kind of a podcast trio, and just like what he said, I've always kind of imagined him as the guy that actually reads the rule books, and if you gave him a chance to, he'll probably write a rule book, and he'll be happy doing it, you know?
Already thought about it.
So we are going to be the main hosts for the podcast episodes, but like I mentioned earlier, we would love for other BARF members, whoever's listening, to eventually join us so that everybody gets to put a voice to the name and add a bit more color, as if we need any more with Kevin. But hey, the more the merrier, or whatever. So
I'm just getting started.
Yeah. Speaking of getting started, we're going to go ahead and move on to actual road racing discussion. Now, for this pilot episode, the three of us actually had discussed it because we are in the midst of a lull right now with the winter band testing and basically in the middle of the off season. But we decided that the best way to kind of have an episode that encapsulates 2014 and yet touch up on 2015 is talk about the one topic or the one rider that is pretty much the focus of 2014 and 2015, and that's reigning MotoGP World Champion and defending MotoGP World Champion Marc Marquez. We just felt like focusing on him, we get to kind of have a look back on what he did in 2014, and we all know that despite all the talented riders right now, that he's still the guy that's going to be on the spotlight, on everybody's radar, that has a target on his back for 2015, and God knows how many more seasons. So for this episode, we're going to go ahead and focus on Marc Marquez and what he's done so far. I want to start off with, with asking Kevin and Rob this question about Marc Marquez. First of all, for the two of you, is it safe for me to assume or to say that you guys didn't expect Marquez to win the title in his rookie year?
Yes, it's safe for me. It was unexpected.
I fully expected Lorenzo to win. Marquez winning the title, basically never being off the podium, sans one or two, ridiculous mistakes, was way unexpected. I thought he was going to have a slightly better than Lorenzo's rookie year, win a couple races, be on the podium a few times, but also in Ernie's best bet, have a couple big, massive crashes because of that style. But he just never did, and still hasn't.
I agree with you guys. I would have never thought that. I mean, the thing is, I've been watching that kid since, I think it was still in 125. It wasn't Moto 3 yet, and
it was 125s then.
Exactly. I think it was the Portugal race where he crashed and then yet remounted, started from the paddock and still won that race, which is a kind of a wet race. I think it's Portugal. Oh no, not maybe. I forgot which round it was, but that was pretty much a defining moment when I started following Marquez, and so I've been watching him since, and I still wouldn't have thought that he would have done what he did in his rookie year. So, with that said, it must be safe for me to say as well that did you guys expect him to defend his title the way he did in such a dominating fashion?
The way he did? No. There's no way I thought he would win double-digit races in a row, or that Lorenzo would seemingly crumble the first half of the season, which, what are you going to do when the second best guy out there doesn't show up half the races the first half of the season? Marquez is just running away with it. He's totally in his head, and I did not expect Lorenzo, this is a guy who beat Rossi and beat Stoner,
Yeah.
You think about his credentials are ridiculous, and for him to not beat Marquez really shows what Marquez is, which is, better than Stoner at his height and what looks to be better than Rossi at his height.
Yeah, it was like the perfect storm of Jorge tanking and the Honda having one up on Yamaha because of the fuel limit and so many other things, and Marquez was just there to take advantage of it. Can't really take anything away of that streak of wins. But I didn't expect it to be that bad for everyone else.
Right, and so with you mentioning as far as Honda and whatnot, Rob, what I wanted to ask you is, in your opinion, could Marquez have had the level of success that he did had he been, let's say, on a Yamaha M1?
I mean, I don't know. Yamaha was pretty far behind at the beginning of the year. Like, kind of in the back of my head, I always think they do this every year. Like, Honda comes out with some development in the off season and has a great bike throughout the season, and Yamaha just kind of slowly does the development in the first half of the season and picks it up. You know, Jorge did the same thing the year before, where he really started winning at the end of the season. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Marquez to be able to ride the M1 to victories, but I don't think he would have been able to put a string of those wins together like that on the Yamaha. It just wasn't. I mean, if you put Jorge or Rossi on the Honda, they would have dominated. They would have won. They would have won more consistently, at least. The Yamaha just wasn't up to Marquez. I mean, even Danny was on the podium quite a few times in the beginning as Jorge was tanking. So the Honda was there. It was ready.
Yeah, and although I would counter slightly with the number one reason it seemed to be that Jorge was having such a problem was the fuel limits. You know, you have give and take somewhere, and with the lower fuel limits, where Yamaha seemed to have the give and take was the beginning, the opening the throttle, where suddenly it was far more abrupt, less smooth. And that's obviously Jorge's forte, where I don't think Marquez really would care if that first 5% of throttle opening is a little more rough, because that's not. I mean, the dude rides so rough, it's unbelievable. He's pivoting the bike on the front tire with the rear wheel in the air, dragging elbow. The thing that was holding the Yamaha back, certainly in Lorenzo's case, I don't necessarily think would have been. I don't think you would have seen that same deer in headlight look that Jorge had the whole time on Lorenzo. He's just, whatever, I'm flying in here.
Yeah, I mean, Marquez would have ridden the Yamaha more like Rossi, right?
Right.
Rossi doesn't depend on that buttery smooth style nearly as much as Jorge does. So, and for the first half of the season, we saw that Rossi was doing considerably better than Jorge. So yeah, I mean, it's likely that Marquez would have ridden around it. I don't think he would have ridden around it as good as we'd hope, as good as he did on the Honda. But yeah,
I don't think I would have had to spend 3 months explaining a perfect season isn't possible.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that either the M1 or the RC213B, they both have their pros and cons. Maybe one has more pros than the other, and vice versa. But I kind of agree a little bit with the point that Rob touched upon earlier. That to me, to simplify it, it seems like between Honda and Yamaha, Honda's always the carrot that Yamaha is trying to chase. Like they seem to just always be just like that little bit behind, or maybe 2 steps behind, unfortunately.
Yeah, and in the past, the riders have made the difference. Like Jorge and Rossi have definitely ridden that bike to the.
So let's bring it back to the riders then. That's a perfect segue, Rob. Thanks. Talking about Marquez and the other riders, what I want us to kind of ponder about now is, last season the old guards being, say, Pedrosa, Lorenzo, and Rossi. They each had their moments of taking the fight to Marquez, but not consistently throughout the season. They each had at least one round, epic battles against Marquez on their own, and some of them still lost out. Rossi, of course, at least won one over Marquez, but nobody really took it the whole season to Marquez, which is effectively what you need to do to win title and to be the world champion. So. What I want to ask you guys is, in your opinion, is it still the old guards that are going to be the first ones to figure out how to take the fight to Marquez throughout a season, or will it be the new bloods, being guys like Paul Espargaro and Maverick Vinales, that's going to be able to finally, dethrone Marquez for a whole season? That's what I kind of want to hear your thoughts on.
I'll go. There's no way Pedrosa's doing it. It's just not happening. And I love Pedrosa, don't get me wrong. He gets a lot of hate. because he's, short and he made a mistake. You guys might have heard of it a couple of years ago against some other guy who was on his team, I think.
Don, you already brought up.
No, I never heard of it. I might have to look that up on YouTube or something. Right. But I'll do that later.
Anyways, I don't think anyone. I think Rossi's too old, and him and Marquez are too buddy. Rossi doesn't hate him. He doesn't have that fire in him that, he almost would. He wants to make sure Marquez loses more than he wins. I think the guy that's going to beat Marquez consistently is someone who's not in MotoGP yet.
You don't think Rossi is actually faster when he's riding for fun and not for that hatred, competitive spirit?
Maybe, but the dude's just getting old, bro. I mean, he's even if you're 1,000th of a percent slower every turn, it adds up to half a second, and you lose those battles. I just don't see him being the guy that could dethrone Marquez. And don't get me wrong, I'm the biggest Rossi nut hugger there is.
Right, and here's my current 2 cents on Rossi. I mean, and Kevin is probably going to love hearing this from me, but I can't deny what everybody else knows, and that, I mean, the guy really is just amazing in his ability to adapt, adopt, and at his age still grow as a rider to be able to still run with these guys. But I have a feeling that on the other hand, while he can successfully do that, it's like Yamaha and Honda. It's just Rossi catching up to what Marquez is already doing. It's not really doing something to kind of take over. It just seems like he did all that work, which, don't get me wrong, it really is an amazing feat, but it was really just all to kind of get up to the level that a guy like Marquez is already comfortable in, and I feel like whoever is going to beat Marquez has to be somebody who does something that he can't otherwise comfortably do himself. And that's my
opinion. The only thing with Rossi is he was playing catch-up, but he had a crew chief who was legitimately a MotoGP rookie crew chief. And he did take a pretty big leap forward just with that, so who knows. But I think you're right. It's some young guy who's going to paradigm shift the way riders ride will be who beats him,
Well, when you say young guy or new blood, you guys aren't considering Paul Espargaro or Maverick Vinales? Are we talking none of those guys at all?
Go ahead, Rob.
I think it's too late. I mean, or maybe they've come in too early. Like, Marquez is still going to grow for the next couple of years. He's going to get better. I mean, he's still working really hard. Paul doesn't have a chance because he's not going to get on a factory bike for at least 2 more years. And by that time, maybe he's already lost the edge. We don't know about Maverick because, I mean, the Suzuki and the fact that he only spent 1 year in Moto2, and there's just too many variables for me there to call it on Maverick. But I'm definitely leaning more towards what Kevin said of I don't think the guy's in GP yet. That'll change the paradigm again.
I want to kind of flip that, though. I mean, by saying that, it's a guy who's not in GP yet, it's almost saying, like, it's not so much a new rider, it's so much just we're just going to have to let time pass and wait perhaps for Marquez to peak, because that's the only way that anybody would be able to do it. I mean, it's just kind of, I just wanted to flip that little concept of the idea that it's going to be Marquez.
It's possible that whoever takes Danny's seat could do it. I mean, it could be Miller, right? Like, maybe Maverick will get tired of Suzuki and he'll take that seat somehow. But really, I mean, at this point, the rules are changing a ton. But it's still going to be the Honda out front. Like, the Yamaha is going to be up there. The Ducatis may come up, but just the level of his talent, right? Like, those younger guys, they need time in GP to learn how to push from the second the lights go out all the way to the very end. And they have to learn to push at a level that they've never experienced before. Right? Like the second Marquez got on that Bridgestone front tire, he started doing things that we didn't necessarily know were possible. And he did it right away. Like, so what's Marquez going to do?
He did it the first test.
Yeah.
He did. It's the Pang 1. He came out and it was, all over the place, and blowing people's minds. And now, 2 years later, dudes in Moto 3 have elbow sliders, and now I don't know how long it is till Alpine starts. I'm selling elbow slider, shoulder slider leathers now for the street. I mean, he completely changed the idea. I mean, it's kind of like Kenny Roberts came in and was backing like crazy when everyone in Europe thought, smooth as butter was the way to go. And then we hear constantly the new Bridgestones and the new electronics. It's all about corner speed being smooth, and Lorenzo's, barely touching the brakes before he goes into turns, and then Marquez comes in like he's riding a dirt bike with no brakes.
Yeah, and I mean, like the M1 was moving that direction until Marquez pretty much showed him that, hey, it's not going to work. Like, I'm going to pass you on the brakes, and I'm going to block you through the mid corner. You're going to lose all your corner speed, and you're not going to win.
Right, yeah, that was definitely evident throughout last season.
Yeah, and I mean, and this season they worked on it, and I feel like they were a little bit more competitive on the brakes, but Marquez got better still. I mean, don't get me wrong, like the top 4 guys are brilliant, and even Dovi's good on the brakes because that Ducati can push in deep into the corner. Like Danny had that one moment at Motegi, right, where in practice where he just did a 200-foot stoppie into the corner, and it looked like he had nowhere to go, and he just made the corner.
Like, now I want them to do that every turn.
Yeah, well, so I feel like that's what Marquez does, is he practically does that every corner. So it's
right.
Jorge, Danny, and Valle, when they were fighting in Stoner 2, one of them would push off from the front, and they were the ones that started that ultimate pace really early in the race. They hard the whole race. Marquez is going hard at a whole new level on the brakes, on the gas, with the bike sideways for the whole race. Like Miller might be able to do that for a couple of laps because he rides kind of nutty for a Moto3 rider. Maybe Maverick too, but can they do it for the whole race? I don't know
though. Maverick's the guy who quit on his team and said he won't ride anymore unless he gets a KTM. Gets a KTM, and then he put up himself, then wins the title on it in a win it or bin it race to go. He's got the gusto and the balls to say, here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it.
That's true.
Even Jack Miller didn't have that.
Nope. Yeah, Jack. I mean, in comparison, Jack Miller got everything handed to him, right? The best team on the best bike, and barely, and his season ended up the way it did.
Right. If he only rode like that for the first half of the season, he'd be the champion instead of acting like he was supposed to win.
Just to go off on a little tangent here on the topic of Jack Miller and Vinales, just out of curiosity, between the two of you, who do you think is more likely to be successful in their GP career now that they're both in MotoGP?
Maverick, for sure.
Yeah, in my opinion, no doubt Maverick. Though I was pretty wrong about Miller this year. I kind of said he was acting like a baby, and then he came out like he was Rocky fighting Ivan Drago. So.
Yeah, Miller did great. I mean,
I gotta say that
he had a bunch of good showings the previous year on lesser equipment, and then he got on the good team, and he kind of did what was expected of him. Go out there and win and fight for the championship, and that was great. But I mean, compared to the stuff that Maverick showed us in Moto 2, new bike, just new category, new different tires, everything changed on Maverick, and he went in there and what did it take him, 3 races to win?
Yeah, I believe he actually broke the record for most points by a rookie in Moto 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember that stat too.
Yeah, so I agree with Rob that I think Maverick has more. Plus, he's Spanish, and only Spanish people do good MotoGP unless your last name means red in Italian.
Oh, I'm wrong.
Man, you're already making the pilot episode controversial.
Correction, Maverick won the second race last year.
Let's
Argentina.
Yep.
Yeah, let's bring it back to Marquez to hopefully wrap this up. There's just one thing I'm kind of curious about, but I don't know if either one of you can answer this. Maybe Kevin, because you've been following a lot longer. But were you following MotoGP during the Doohan era?
No, directly, not so much. No, I started getting in when Rossi was winning in 125 and 250. Followed it, but I didn't have access to regular viewing of it, to be able to really follow it hardcore.
Yeah, so then maybe the question I was about to ask, depending on how you answer that, is maybe it's better we save it for the next episode when we bring in another barfer that's kind of been around that time. Basically, what I was curious is like if when they were around the Mick Doohan era, and then now they've seen Marquez. I'm just wondering if this is history repeating itself, or if it's history like being rewritten.
Well,
or
allow
being
me to fake it till I make it.
And I'll
Right.
interject too.
Right. I
Yeah,
think
go-
the main. I was thinking about this actually earlier. The main difference between Doohan and Marquez is, as insane as this year for Marquez was, a lot of those race wins were real close. He came out of scraps. If you go back and look at the actual times, he wasn't. He was destroying people, but he was doing it by getting the last laugh or taking that last extra swing. Doohan had those guys
Yeah.
beat before he ever even got to the track. It was those guys were not even playing the same game as him. They're in a completely different league. Marquez, just as easily, if things went slightly different, could have had like 8 wins.
Okay.
That's my opinion, at least just from looking at the old races and who he was against and what was going on. Doohan's domination was devastating to those guys, like their morale. Marquez's domination against Rossi is like two dudes having fun.
I mean, that sort of is true of a lot of the races back then, before we got to 4-strokes and stuff. Right? The equipment difference was huge. So you get the two factory guys battling it out. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is entirely true of all of Doohan's wins, but it just there wasn't the level of competition, right? Like, sure, only 4 guys have really won everything in the past couple of years, but there have been quite a few people on the podium for the past decade, and that may not have been true back then. So I was more saying that to your question about history, as opposed to the actual riding talent there.
Then do either one of you, what do you, have you thought about if he can do a hat trick as far as 2015 is concerned?
Yes.
Yeah, the championship, I've got nothing wrong with that. I don't think it's going to be as dominant as 2015, or I mean as 2014. There's no way in hell Jorge is going to have the same bullshit start that he had this year. There's no way.
Yeah.
Rossi, if he stays exactly the same, gets another 2 wins or maybe 3 or 4, awesome. Danny, I have no idea, but the simple fact that there is no possible way that Jorge is going to do that again is going to make it harder for Marquez. And I think he's slowly losing his advantages. I think the lack of electronic development towards the end of the year might hinder him at least a little bit, because Honda really just pushes on with that constantly without telling anyone. And and I just think it's going to be too hard. I mean, it's the same reason why I don't think anyone else is going to win for a while, right? Because at this point, they've got to beat those top 4 guys. It's not one like when it was just Rossi. When Rossi was dominating, he was the only guy. So if he had an off day, someone else would pick up the pieces. But with 4 guys taking all of the wins, like the chances of all 4 of them having a bad day, pretty slim.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I mean, even now, if Marquez has a bad day, right, the other 3 will pick it up.
Yeah, it's so difficult for a new guy to even get a podium, let alone, I mean, you look at Pol Espargaro, no podiums. Reigning Moto2 champion on Tech 3, which is a bike that was podiuming like crazy for years. I mean, Dovizioso had 6 podiums on it in his first year on the bike, and he's barely sniffing that, that top 4. It's so hard for a guy for any young guns to break through that it's going to have to be an outrageous talent that just does a Marquez or a Rossi or a Lorenzo, which is just, be one of the top 4 fastest guys from the first race.
I lost $20 over Paul not getting a podium.
We can
That's okay. I gained $200 for Rossi winning 2 races, but we won't talk about that.
Well, we're going to have to save that for future episodes. If we are going to have future episodes, I think this would be a good point for us to wrap up this pilot episode. So, what I want to ask, what we want to ask you, the listener or listeners, our BARF members, is, if you thought this was a waste of your time, or if this was actually a pretty good time spent listening and sitting through it, let us know. I'm gonna bump up that podcast thread, and kind of in the meantime, while we're in the off season, let that be the discussion thread for podcast. Let us know what you think, and whether you want us to keep this ball rolling now that we've started rolling it. And the sooner we can read or hear your thoughts, the sooner we can plan on the next episode, the next 2 or 3 episodes, whatever it is that that you feel is warranted. So,
well, so Dennis, can we give him a teaser? Let's at least pitch what we're going to talk about in the coming months. Like, I mean, obviously this time we didn't really have anything to talk about because there's no testing going on. There hasn't been much in the news, and but stuff is going to kick off here pretty quick.
Oh yeah, I mean, 2015 has a lot of storylines, more than usual, between Suzuki and the development freeze. Obviously, Ducati's ongoing thing. What's going to happen with Forward? Can they continue to move forward and build off what Aleix did? Is Aprilia going to be a total disaster their first year running like a sort of CRT bike? There's a lot to talk about, even the offseason leading up, where I can act as if I know what I'm talking about.
No, you guys are absolutely right on that one. We're just, part of the reason why we really tried to get this first episode done and posted before 2014 is over, because 2015 is right around the corner, and like you guys said, we're going to have a lot of stories to cover, a lot of news, a lot of events and happenings going on that we want to kind of gloss over about. So I don't even know where to start with a teaser, Rob, because there's just so many.
No, that was it. That was perfect.
Yeah, but
what Kevin said, that was perfect.
we want to hear and read about what the other members want to say, if they're really genuinely excited about it. To kind of give us an incentive to keep doing this, because this shit ain't easy. So let us know. Chime in on the thread. We're gonna bump it up. And for now, unless my 2 other co-hosts have anything else to say, we are gonna be signing out.
If you keep listening, I promise to talk louder.